Welcome, everyone. So glad to have you here today for this very special Facebook Live event on schools, mental health, suicide risk, reopening, COVID-19, so much in 30 minutes. I'm Jonathan Singer. I am the president of the board of the American Association of Suicidology. I'm also an associate professor of social work at Loyola University Chicago. And I'm really glad to be here today with Jen Halter from the National Association of Secondary School Principals and Ben Fernandez from the National Association of School Psychologists. And we're going to be talking about schooling during the pandemic and the transition back to in-person. And it's great that we have a psychologist and a principal. And I'm just going to start out by sharing a little bit about what we know about the research around suicide risk and schools. First of all, we know that suicide risk has been increasing in youth for years. That the data from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey has indicated that we have about 18 or 19% of high school students having serious thought of killing themselves in the past year. That when we break this down by different categories, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, even grade level, we can see huge differences in terms of the percentages. We don't have really good data about real-time suicide risk in the United States. The CDC just published final numbers for suicide deaths in 2019. Right, so that's not 2020, right, when the pandemic was. That was 2019. Also, one of the challenges for understanding suicide risk for youth in the United States, right, thoughts of suicide, plans, attempts, is that our main source of data for understanding these is from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. And the Youth Risk Behavior Survey was not collected in 2020. It wasn't collected in 2020, not because of the pandemic. It just wasn't scheduled to be collected. So forevermore, we're going to go through and we're not going to have... Wait, does that mean that you're in school and that was a bell?
Yes, I'm sorry about that.
It's all good. It's all good. See, just in case you thought these were actors in a studio, these are actual live school employees who are in their buildings. So one of the challenges that we have is that our main source of data for youth students and suicide risk was not collected in 2020. And this is going to make it really difficult for us to be able to make statements nationally about what suicide risk looks like. What I do know is that schools have worked phenomenally hard to pivot both for online learning and for all of the other things that society has decided that schools should be in charge of, including feeding kids, making sure they've got tech resources, access to the internet, mental health screening, training, sort of education on sexual abuse and domestic violence and everything, right? And I know that schools worked really hard to pivot, and they had to focus a lot on their main function, which was the curriculum and educating and how are we going to do this. In terms of suicide risk, one of the big challenges is that we have created suicide prevention so that it focuses on a school staff or several school staff and then a suicidal kid. And eventually we bring in a parent, right? And that could be sooner or later, depending on a whole bunch of things. When the pandemic hit and everybody went remote, that model got flipped so that it was the parent and the student, or the parent and their child, bringing in the school at some point. And that was a really tough thing for schools to negotiate. And it was a really hard thing for parents to wrap their heads around, as well as kids. So I'm just throwing it out there that we have a lot of things that we don't know. And there are a lot of things that people have tried during this pandemic. The take-home message for me is that we have a long way to go to better provide services and to address suicide risk in schools when we're looking at remote learning. And that's not something that's going to go away. we're always going to have kids who are doing remote learning. And so this is something that is really important for us to dive into and understand what are the lessons learned and what are the things that we need to um, to do more work on. And so with that, I just want to pass it off to Jen for your perspective as a principal.
Hi, so I'm Jen Halter. I'm a principal in Florida with the National Association of Secondary School Principals. I am at Green Cove Springs Junior High. So we have 7th and 8th grade middle school students. So we went back to school in Florida in August. Late, we only pushed our school year back 2 weeks. And in preparing for that, a lot of the kind of angst around opening our schools up during COVID, when most of the nation is just now opening back up, is really allowing parents and students and even our staff to frame their insecurity, their fear around coming back during a pandemic and what that looks like. The big thing that we believe in here in Florida, but also at our school in Clay County Schools, is that we want our kids to feel connected and supported. And so a couple things we do are Florida, we have a state statute now that is requiring all of our educators to have youth mental health first aid training. So all of our adults on campus know what to look for, how to support our kids, and the supports that are in place for when our kids are in crisis or needing someone. A big thing that we push for here in Green Cove is that we make sure all kids are connected. So we make sure all of our adults are forming lasting relationships with our students and that they feel seen and heard. A couple things that we do for that, if you're a school leader watching this, is that we have social emotional learning time that is part of our instruction every single day. It is a set aside 15 minutes a day. And those lessons are provided through our school counselors, pushed to our teachers. So if you want more resources on that, I'm happy to share that out. But it is something that is part of our state statute, but also something that here in Green Cove we did before it became state statute, because we believe that kids, when they feel connected and heard, that they know adults they can look to for help. And that has happened a few times here where kids have actually gone to our adults and said, I feel I'm having some thoughts, I'm having some feelings, and they take them right to our counselor. We have a response team in place and a crisis team if we need it. So we have a lot of supports in place here, but I recognize too that that's not enough. Most of our schools do not have enough mental health counselors and supports throughout the nation. I benefit here, but of course we could always use more resources. So those are just a few things we have in place. But the big thing with COVID was you really need to help kids feel safe. And we did a lot of putting in routines and making sure they knew how to navigate in this world where we're staying 6 feet apart and we're wearing a mask. And don't fret, I've got one right here. But all the safety protocols that help them to feel safe. And then we start with the connection. I think one more thing, and I'll push it to Ben, is in Florida too, you've probably heard, we're going with standardized testing, and we're pushing academics, and even our online learners that do not come in the school are somehow going to be tested with standardized testing. And so making sure that we help our kids understand that a test does not define who you are. It just measures what you've learned for the year, that you are way more than one standardized test score. But it does help us to notify where we need to meet those and fill those gaps that they've lost with COVID. But also that we make sure that leaders, that you all focus on not always the academic push as the most important thing right now, but also that we're teaching humans, right? We're teaching humans, and we need to make sure that they are taken care of first and foremost so that they can learn. So just remember that we're all here together, going through it together, and NASSP does have some great resources out there. One of them was the reentry, restart and recovery that went out in September 2020, and they'll link that into our Facebook Live here to help you. But it has also, in building ranks with NASSP, is a wellness section so that you can look for other ways to help support your staff and to help support the kids. So Ben?
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. I'm Ben Fernandez. I'm a a lead school psychologist for my district, Loudoun County Public Schools, outside about 45 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. And I'm also a high school psychologist. And I also serve on the National Association of School Psychologists School Safety and Response Committee. But for us, I think Jonathan painted the picture of what we've gone through. We've been on distance learning for the majority of our school year. We tried to bring students back, but then ended up going back to distance learning. And now we're back hybrid. Our elementary started, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and secondary levels started last week. So this is kind of my second week of school, technically. But I've been working virtually, supporting student mental health needs in our schools since we closed back in about a year ago, in March. And I think our experience since the closure was just that, realizing that once we closed, our brick and mortar safety nets were not there. And we really had to pivot very, very quickly because we recognized that the needs of our students, our school communities were still there. Despite the building being closed, we still had to support our students in a number of ways. And so we took a very hard look at what already existed, what we had in place already, and adapted it to the virtual environment. And with a couple of things that we really had to focus on, most importantly is that equitable access. Sorry, apologize. That equitable access to technology. Not everyone has a device. Not everyone has a connection to the internet. And then there are multiple languages in our district. How do we communicate? How do we reach those folks, those families, to make sure they're able to connect to our mental health supports and resources? Fortunately, pre-COVID, all our secondary schools had unified mental health teams, and they were dedicated staff at our secondary schools to provide the support, mental health supports, prevention, intervention supports for our students. And we also had that at the elementary level, and we really took a hard look at how do we utilize those teams much more, and making sure students and families knew how to reach out to us. We also reached out to our community partners because we couldn't do a lot of our supports, mental health supports, without community collaboration. Because school mental health needs, particularly when it comes to suicide prevention, is a 24/7, 7-day-a-week thing. Schools are only open a certain number of hours, but those needs continue around the clock. And so, how did we work with our community partners to address those needs? And we worked very closely with our county mental health services. We have our Office of Safety and Security that works very closely with our community law enforcement, and we were able to come up with a solution to address the needs of our students. But that was part one in a way. The next thing we had to do when students were coming back to school was how do we, establish a sense of connection through a screen in a virtual environment. And each of our schools worked very hard to establish that sense of community, establish that sense of connection. And all of our schools, first thing in the morning, we have advisory, which 20 to 30 minutes of teachers meeting with a small group of students, and even some of our counselors and other mental health staff had that opportunity as well. And we would push out our social emotional learning resources that way. And we really focused, like I said, on connection. We focused on resiliency, on hope, because in the beginning, there's that thread of uncertainty that just seems to weave itself through everything. And we wanted to make sure there was that sense of hope and strength. We have the skills, we have the resiliency to get through this, but also, again, reminding students who their trusted, to identify their trusted adults and how to get help in school, but also outside of school. So there were a number of things that we were really pushing to get into place. Now back to the safety nets, we also had to, like I said, adapt to providing, conducting, our services online, whether it be, counseling or doing suicide screenings, and how do we connect students to the right supports. So that's been our experience. Now with students coming back, it's been pretty good. Some hiccups here and there, but I think so far we're still pushing forward with that connection and providing their needs as it comes up.
Well, thank you both for sharing your experiences. And I think that, just even with the two of you, the difference in being back since August or back for the last 2 weeks means that the community of school professionals is in a really weird situation, because it's not like everybody's kind of going through the same thing at the same time of year, which kind of typically happens, right? One of my kids' teachers last year in March or in April, she sent out an email and she's like, I just need you to know that, really March, April, May, June is kind of like, it's like dessert for teachers. Like, we put in all the hard work and the classes have gelled and now we're finally reaping the benefits of all this, right? It's really kind of like we're rocking it to the end of the school year, but that can't happen now, because everything's been flipped upside down, and that sense of loss that school professionals also feel, and the sense of kind of like, this is not what I was trained for, this is not what I've done for the last 20 years, I know adds to the sense of stress. I want to say, for folks that are watching live, if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat and we will do our best to address those. Or if you want to say nice things about some of the things that Jen and Ben have shared, please pop that in there also. One of the things that I wanted to throw out to both of you, just kind of a brief response, is, let's say that there was a kid who, either let a teacher know that they were thinking of killing themselves, or that they were suicidal, or that they weren't sure if they could make it through to the year. From a principal's perspective, right? What are some things that schools are doing, kind of administratively, to address that? And then Ben, for you, like from the kind of the school psychologist, school social work perspective, what are schools doing to address that?
So from a school, we do have those cases every now and then. I just had one a couple weeks ago. The student knew and felt comfortable to go to one of her teachers, and then he walked her right to the school counselor. The school counselor did an assessment, talked to her. We use the Columbia here, so did an assessment through that, and then decided from there what the next steps would be, which I won't go into, but it was handled correctly. We do have an excellent support system at the district office too, Ms. Heather McDonald and her staff, and they help support the school leaders with any questions we have. They walk through it. We have a response team that comes and handles it and keeps us in the loop. And of course, from the principal seat, I just check up on the student if they leave for a while and come back. We have a reentry meeting with our school counselor, and then I usually check up on them myself and make sure that they're having an okay day back at the school, if there's any supports, more additional supports. And we also touch base with the parent and make sure if there's any other resources that need to be provided. Usually there is. And just to let them know that we're a partner in this work and that we're here for the kid, and our students are so important to us, and that they are noticed, seen, and heard. That's the biggest thing, is that especially right now, all the time, but especially now with heightened other traumas going on, that with the pandemic, that we are just on top of it and constantly making sure that all of the community surrounding the child is there, and just to keep communicating that.
That's great. Ben?
So when we have a situation like that, our unified mental health team is immediately activated, and one of us, we work as a team addressing the need. We also use the Columbia here, and there'll be two of us, participating with the interview with the student and assessing the need there. But at the same time, we have other people trying to identify, where the parent is. We want to make sure we're connecting with the parent. We also want to know exactly where the student is. If we're lucky, the student and we're able to connect through a video conferencing, their camera is on, and so we have a sense of where they are. But we want to specifically know: are they home? Are they in their bedroom? Are they in the basement? Where are they in the home? And ask them, is your parent home? Or is another family member home? And meanwhile, like I said, we're reaching out to the parent to bring them into the picture, because you're right, it has flipped. The student is not physically in our building necessarily, and so we're addressing those needs right away, and trying to make sure ultimately that the student is safe, and the parent and family is aware, to make sure they get connected to the right supports that they need based on our screening. We also have the opportunity to connect with our community emergency services to bring them into the loop, and provide additional supports for the family and the students. And we work very hard to get them connected, and then if they end up being hospitalized or missing school for a period of time, when they come back, we're ready to have a return to learn plan to make sure that they are transitioning back into school, and one, feeling like they're being successful, and then just the academics alone are not pushing them back to the place where they were feeling so horribly, and providing other supports, as well as trying to help the family navigate some of the challenges of connecting with outside providers and things like that. I think those are some of the important things we do when we have a situation like that. And NASP has a number of great resources in terms of conducting virtual suicide assessments. That we have just a general guidance document and a couple checklists that can help folks run through that.
That's great. Thank you for running through both of those scenarios. And I'm wondering if there are, I'm sure there are tons of things, but if there are one or two things that you can think of that you have seen during the pandemic, or that have been revealed in the pandemic, that are either gaps that need to be addressed by the suicidology community, either by researchers, by folks who are developing programs, or if there are kind of systems of care issues that you've noticed should be addressed moving forward, like kind of lessons learned from the pandemic, so that so that we can actually be stronger after this. And either one of you want to start, would love to hear what you have to say. And I realize you are not speaking on behalf of your districts, or, so these are just your impressions and the things that you've recognized.
Well, I guess, Ben, you want to go?
No, go ahead.
Oh, I guess lessons learned. Well, Florida, we went back to school quickly, and I was on the news as the principal saying, I don't know, we'll give it 2 weeks and find out. We'll just put the whole community back together. And I was skeptical. And with all the systems we put in place for safety, we have not closed school. We have not shut down. We have not, we have had very low rates of infection, very low. And so with that being said, I also wondered if we would have more kids with suicide rates. Sky, you hear that they've been going up, and the issues with students that we know about have not been tied directly to the pandemic. And so that's kind of eye-opening, right? A little bit for us with this. And the other thing we've noticed too is, when I was talking to my district leadership on this, was that when they are home, and Ben can speak more to this, but when our students are learning from home, when they're in front of us in a school system, they do come to us, and most of them, and they do come in and report and say, I need help. And we have the systems in place in front of us. But when they're learning from home, it's the other way around, like you mentioned at the beginning of this, where the parent is the first responder, right? And so if the parent doesn't choose to share that information with us, or to share even how they handled it, if they did send the child for help, that we're not aware unless they tell us. So that is another eye-opening thing that we didn't know would be something we're handling. So, and that transitions to you, Ben, because you had mentioned that a little bit before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, one of the things that we've been stressing for years with all our students at the high school and elementary school in our prevention work is identifying that trusted adult. Who is your go-to adult in school? And, that is the person to go to with, the concerns that you have. And I would say that has been, even though we've had parents reach out to us with concerns, we still have had students that are going to their go-to trusted adult and asking for assistance that way. So that's been really helpful. And we've been, some of our prevention work, we use signs of suicide, and we've been doing that for a very long time in Loudoun, and so that's been very helpful with establishing that atmosphere of who are your trusted adults. And we've also kind of expanded it, not just if you're having thoughts of suicide, but if you're being bullied, if you're being harassed, if you're whatever the issue is, it's a safety issue, and we want to make sure you're connected to the help that you need. And so we've been emphasizing, we've been stressing that through the pandemic time, and that's something definitely we're going to continue to do to years to come. But to your question, or your question about lessons learned, I think for me is, one of the things I thought was very impressive is just how quickly we pivoted and how quickly we looked at what we needed to do and adapted it and moved on. And we continue to look at things, and learn from it and develop it. But I absolutely think that when we return, there's going to be a lot of things that are going to stay. I don't have a crystal ball, but I kind of wonder if I'm still going to be doing some form of telehealth work. And so I think in that case, we kind of had a crash course in telehealth work, and I would love to have more training on that. And again, this is my personal views, and I think from a comprehensive school safety planning approach, I think the thought of continuity. If you asked me September 2019 if we could close for a year, I would have kind of chuckled at you and said, no, that's not happening. But we did. And, there was a time period where we were unprepared. We had to retool, we had to scramble. So I think moving forward, the biggest lesson for me is understanding continuity and making sure that our mental health resources always have that mindset of continuity. It may be another pandemic. I don't know. It could be a big natural disaster. What are those things that we can do to close up shop in my office at school? I can go home or another place and open up shop as if nothing happened, and I can still provide those services for those students. So that's probably the biggest thing I'm going to be focusing on for me in my practice and the work we do with our with the National School Safety Crisis Response Committee. That's a big question I have in my mind. How can we be better at it? I think we did the best we could, but I always think we can get better and better because we're going to be called to. And our ultimate goal is serving the needs of our students and school communities.
Well, that's great. And I just want to say that we have 90 seconds left for this Facebook Live. And, I want to thank everybody who joined in. I appreciate the National Association of School Psychologists and National Association of Secondary School Principals. Both could be pronounced NASP. So if you just sort of are wondering what's going on, that's what's going on. Thanks for sharing those resources. The American Association of Suicidology has a resource list. And I want to thank Jen and Ben. Thank you so much for being on here and, in a very brief amount of time, sharing your experiences and sharing your insights into how schools have addressed mental health, suicide risk during the pandemic in two very different settings. So I really, really appreciate that. Thank you so much for all of the work that you've done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're going to hang out for another couple of seconds.